There's a funny moment that always happens when someone watches enough anime eventually. They hit that point where they glance at the screen and go, okay, but why does this look like England? Not Tokyo, not Osaka, not future Japan with neon signs and holographic cats. England, Victorian England, horse-drawn carriage, cobblestone street, smoky chimney England. And honestly, once you see it, you cannot unsee it. You start noticing the gas lamps, the gothic spires, the whimsical, slightly cluttered interiors that look like they belong to a retired professor from Oxford who drinks too much tea. And suddenly you realise anime has a huge crush on Britain, an affectionate, aesthetically committed crush. Today, we're going into why it shows up everywhere, from Studio Ghibli films to fantasy adventure anime to shows that literally have no business being set in London, yet somehow manage to look like London anyway. Back then, Japan had just opened up to the West after centuries of isolation in the 1800s. Victorian Britain wasn't just a country, it was a whole atmosphere. Fog, steam, lanterns, carriages, gothic stories, royalty, architecture that looked like it came out of a storybook. To Japan, this all felt exotic, almost fantasy-like. Even as Japan modernized, those visuals stuck around as a kind of dreamlike foreign aesthetic. It never lost its charm, and when animation arrived, Japan suddenly had a blank canvas to paint. That's why you'll see early anime illustrations and background paintings where European towns appear almost idolized, cuter, brighter, more magical than they ever actually were. These aren't historically accurate recreations, they are interpretations of interpretations, artistic nostalgia passed through generations. And Studio Ghibli, especially Miyazaki, absorbed that influence like a sponge. Why Miyazaki in particular gravitated towards British settings? Well, Miyazaki has been very open about his influences, and Britain shows up in almost all of them. He reads British novels, and did as a kid quite regularly. Not just Alice in Wonderland or Peter Pan, but lesser known ones like The Little Grey Man, The Borrowers, and anything illustrated with cozy English countryside houses. These weren't minor inspirations, they shaped the way he imagined fantasy worlds. You can see this especially in his love for steep-roofed cottages, narrow streets, overgrown gardens, clock towers, timber-framed houses, old-fashioned doorways and windows, misty morning landscapes. Basically peak British storybook energy. And Miyazaki didn't just read British authors, he admired British illustrators, especially those who worked with soft watercolours and gentle line work. Their influence shows in places like Howls Moving Castle, Kiki's Delivery Service, and even smaller elements scattered across Ghibli's worlds. When you watch a Ghibli film, you can often tell it's inspired by somewhere European before the story even begins. The air looks European, the skylines look European, the city and the clothes look European, even the teapots look like they came from a Victorian flea market. Japan has its own rich tradition of fantasy, but British atmosphere gives Ghibli films that sense of warm, dreamy, fairy tale nostalgia the Japanese settings alone can't produce. British aesthetics equal Miyazaki's shortcut to magic. Here's a simple way to think about it. Japanese countryside equals calm, everyday beauty. British countryside equals slightly magical, maybe a wizard will walk out of the hedge kind of magical. Miyazaki uses British or vaguely British European settings when he wants things to feel whimsical the moment the camera pans across the landscape. No exposition needed, no magic spells yet, just vibes. Think of a typical Victorian street. Iron gates, flower boxes, stained glass windows, glass lamps, narrow alleys, creaky wooden staircases, bookshops on corners. Even if nothing supernatural is happening, your brain feels like it could. British environments give Ghibli films an instant storybook realism, where everything feels grounded but also enchanted, and that mix is something anime creators adore. Victorian Britain wasn't just a place, it was an aesthetic language, one that signals nostalgia, coziness, and mystery all at once. There's a moment in Howl's Moving Castle, and honestly, you can pick almost any scene where you sit back and go, okay, Miyazaki absolutely thought about England while drawing this. It might be Sophie's hat shop street with its stone pavements and tidy storefronts. It might be the brass pipes running through the castle like Victorian plumbing on caffeine. It might even be Howl's ridiculously over-the-top bedroom, which looks like a wizard hoarded every shiny object from a London flea market. But the point is, you feel the Britishness even when the movie refuses to confirm it. We're going to break down how Howl's Moving Castle became one of the clearest examples of anime's obsession with Britain. Not through lectures about architecture textbooks or historical essays, but simply by looking at the film itself. The visuals, the mood, the way it borrows from British fantasy novels and then cranks everything up to 11. How the opening scene already screams British storybook is pretty evident to most viewers. The film starts with Sophie working in a hat shop, and immediately your brain whispers, this looks like a town somewhere between Bath, Oxford, and the universal idea of Victorian Europe. The buildings are tight together, made of stone, with bay windows and cute little balconies. The shop signs hang from iron brackets. The street is narrow, the walls have that cold, kind of old, slightly weathered look, where you just know hundreds of people have walked past for decades. And for the colour, they've got muted browns, soft blues, earthy reds. It looks like pages from an old British illustrated novel. This isn't flashy Tokyo lighting, it's cozy, lived-in craftsmanship. When Sophie locks the front door and steps outside, the film gives you a little establishing shot of the town, and here's the key part. There's no neon, no modern signage, no power lines, nothing industrial beyond steam trains and chimneys. That's straight Victorian Britain mood setting right there. Ghibli could have set this scene anywhere, but they didn't. They drew a town that feels like it sells scones in Sundays. The Market Street scene is also a key one, a perfect slice of Victorian energy. The moment Sophie walks through the crowd, you see it. The layout, the way the stalls are arranged, the old-fashioned clothes, the textures on the buildings, it all feels like a busy morning in a Victorian marketplace. The shop displays have wooden awnings, patterned fabrics, baskets of goods. Even the soldiers marching through the crowd look straight out of a late 19th century European sketchbook. Their uniforms are decorated, structured, a little impractical, and very British influenced. And you know what seals the deal? The posters and signage in the background. They're not written in English, but they're designed in the style of early British advertising. Serif fonts, broad strokes, embellishments, all the stuff that you'd expect on a poster selling tea in the 1890s. This is what we mean by anime's obsession with Britain. It's not direct copying, it's aesthetic memory. How could walk directly into a Victorian-era fantasy novel and not look out of place for 1 second? When he appears above Sophie on the rooftop, stepping onto the stone ledge with the confidence of a man who moisturizes, he brings with him a vibe that is very European, very British fairy tale, and very Ghibli. His clothes aren't Japanese, they're a romanticized blend of European wizard fashion with hints of 19th century tailoring. Long coat that swishes dramatically, boots polished to perfection, shirt with gentle ruffles, jewelry that feels medieval and modern at the same time. He's not a sorcerer from Japanese folklore, he's a British literary wizard, through and through. And the way he moves Sophie through the air, the gentle gliding, the calm voice, the view over the rooftops, feels like stepping into a story by Diana Wynne Jones, which is literally what it is. It's her version of magic, grounded, quiet, and Miyazaki honoured that tone visually. The castle is the bridge between British industry and fantasy chaos. Look at it carefully and you'll see Victorian engineering everywhere. Brass pipes, steam vents, clanking gears, iron plating, rivets, smokestacks, tiny doors with metal hinges, the little balcony that looks like it came from a British ship. It's messy, crooked and alive, like something a half-asleep Victorian engineer sketched after too much tea. And the legs? Those awkward chicken-like mechanical legs? Those are straight out of early industrial age imagination, when people thought steam-powered walking machines were just around the corner. Anime loves this hybrid of old machinery and magic, because it creates a world that feels familiar but impossible. If Miyazaki set Howl's castle in Tokyo, it would feel sci-fi. Set it in a British-inspired landscape, and it feels like folklore evolved into technology. There's a specific kind of green in Howl's moving castle, that lush, slightly damp, morning dew green, and it screams British countryside. The hills are gentle, the farms are spaced out, the trees cluster around rivers, and the stone bridges curve in that perfect English way. Even the little houses dotting the horizon look like they've been standing there since the 1700s. One of the most British shots in the entire film is the castle stomping across a field with sheep grazing peacefully and a foggy sky ahead. That is textbook British countryside energy. You basically expect a shepherd to appear at any moment offering Hal tea. Inside the castle, well, the inside of Howl's castle is one of the most visually dense spaces that Studio Ghibli has ever drawn, in my opinion, but it's also clearly inspired by European, especially British interior designs. Let's break down some of the details that I could find. First, we have the fireplace. This is Calcifer's fireplace and it's massive. It's brick-lined and has an old-fashioned iron gate, or grate as some people call it. It's the kind of fireplace that you'd see in a centuries-old English cottage or an old London stone house. Huge mantelpiece, stacks of logs, soot-blackened bricks. It's very British. Next, you have the shelves. They're busy, cluttered, and filled with mismatched jars, books, dusty pots, old kettles, teacups and bottles. This is basically the inside of an eccentric professor's house with, well, a bunch of British novels written everywhere. Then you have the wooden flooring. It's old, creaky, dark wood, the kind you polish with beeswax, very English and very Victorian. Then there's Hal's bathroom. This thing is Victorian plumbing gone insane. It has pipes, levers, taps, tiles. Everything looks like it came out of a 19th century British home, but got enchanted to misbehave. What about the colour-coded door dials? Not British, but the way it's framed. The idea that each door leads to a different town or setting, that has roots in British fantasy portals, wardrobe doors like in Narnia, rabbit holes like Alice in Wonderland, train platforms like Harry Potter. It's so Diana Wynne Jones that it hurts. Sophie's bedroom cleaning scene is a huge one I wanted to bring up. When Sophie decides that the castle needs cleaning, we get a deep look at the whole interior, but the vibe is not Japanese domestic life, it's European countryside cottage energy. Observe the wooden beams, the tiny windows, the patterned curtains, the old chairs, the kettle, the stone floor, the dusty shelves, and the mismatched furniture. It's like a cottage that you'd find tucked somewhere between Wales and Cornwall, where someone's been meaning to clean up since 1894. Even Sophie's cleaning itself feels reminiscent of British household scenes from older movies, someone bringing order to a chaotic magical home. The Kingsbury City is a massive inspiration. When Sophie visits the royal city, the film shifts to full Victorian fantasy mode. The architecture, it's classical European, with grand buildings, detailed stonework, domed roofs and wide streets. The soldiers and police uniforms, they're straight out of a late 19th century British parade. Tall hats, polished buttons, stiff posture, and decorative straps. How about the crowds? Well, we see ladies in long dresses, men in tailored suits, parasols everywhere. It's Victorian city life, but all anime style. This film feels British even when it isn't trying. Because Diana Jones wrote the source material, people think the Britishness comes from the book alone, but Ghibli added even more European flavour. Jones's novel is set in a fantasy world, but Miyazaki reimagined the setting so strongly around Europe influences that the whole environment feels tied to Britain and its neighbours. In other words, the book gave the recipe, Miyazaki doubled the seasoning, and it worked. The result is a film that looks British, moves British, sounds British, even in Japanese, and feels British. But at the same time, it doesn't obsess over accuracy. It's not recreating a real place, it's recreating the fantasy idea of a British world. And that's exactly why viewers fall in love with it. Another thing I wanted to cover was the food scenes. Think about it. Remember the breakfast scene? Bacon, eggs, bread, cheese, fried on a skillet over a massive hearth? This is a very British style of hearty countryside breakfast, comforting, rustic and cozy. Calcifer cooking under the pan is pure anime magic, but the meal itself, peak European farmhouse. Even Sophie's cooking style, no fancy spices, no elaborate techniques, reflects simple, homely, Western meals. Sophie is a British storybook heroine. Sophie fits the archetype of a British heroine so perfectly that it's almost impossible not to see. She's practical, quietly stubborn, modest, kind, grounded, unbothered by weird magical nonsense. She reacts to magic with the same energy as British characters who stumble into fantasy worlds and go, "Alright then, kettle on, let's figure this one out." Her transformation into an old woman mirrors characters in British fantasy who grow into their identity by literally transforming or aging forward. And her connection with Hal follows that soft, quiet, conversational, romantic style typical of British stories, not dramatic, not loud, not organic companionship. Why the end of the film also feels British? When the war ends, the castle collapses, the characters find safety in the countryside, you get this feeling like you've just been watching a British coming-of-age fairy tale disguised as an anime. Even the final landscape is hilltops, fresh morning light, quiet fields. It looks like somewhere in rural England after a long magical journey. It's comforting, it's warm, it's fairy tale closure done the British way. Picture this. It's 3 AM, you're half awake, half dreaming, still wearing socks in bed for no reason, and someone puts on Kiki's delivery service. Suddenly, everything feels soft, warm, bright, like someone wrapped your brain in a fluffy scarf. And then it hits you. Kiki's delivery service doesn't feel Japanese, it feels British, or at least anime British, not actual British. But the ideal Britain, the kind of Britain authors describe in children's novels from the 40s, the kind of Britain where people say, "Oh my," instead of "what the hell?" Kiki's city, Kuriko, is this weird, beautiful mashup of Cornish fishing villages, London row houses, Edinburgh rooftops, Stockholm streets because Miyazaki cheated and used Sweden too, and the general vibe of a postcard that you'd buy at a cute bookstore. So, we're going to unpack exactly why Kiki's delivery service feels so British too, just like Howl's Moving Castle, even though the film was animated in Japan, set in fictional Europe, and inspired by like 5 different countries. Before we even talk about Kiki herself, we need to bring in Miyazaki's obsession with Europe, especially the softer cozy parts. A couple of important easy to digest facts are: number 1, Miyazaki spent years travelling around Europe for inspiration, not just visiting but walking around with a sketchbook like a tourist whose phone battery had just died. Number 2, he really loves old-fashioned towns that look lived in. He said this in interviews dozens of times, houses that look like someone actually made toast inside them. Number 3, he hates modern, overly industrial cities. In other words, he loves the idea of small British towns, not London's traffic. So when he started designing Kuriko, he blended British coastal charm, British family stories, British bakery culture, British politeness and manners, and British just get on with it vibes. And that's why this film hits us with the emotional equivalent of a hug from a bakery owner who smells like cinnamon and disappointment. Let's break down why the city in Kiki feels so British, even though it's technically a fictional European mashup. Firstly, you have the seaside atmosphere. British seaside towns love neat little steep steps, narrow alleys, boats parked at weird angles, houses with bright windows, old ladies carrying too many bags, people who look like they own a cat. Kiki's town is exactly like that. There's even a scene where Kiki is flying over the harbour, and let's be real, it looks like St. Ives on the sunniest day it's had in 40 years. What about the architecture? The houses are very tall, narrow, stacked roof to roof, full of chimneys, a very British thing. They're painted in soft pastel tones. Even Kiki's room above the bakery feels like the kind of spare room that every British grandma keeps for when the cousins visit. The bakery itself tells me this isn't British. Come on, whoever said that? Really? The bakery where Kiki lives is basically the Great British Bake Off but animated. It has wooden beams, flour in the air, warm light from lamps, pastries stacked like they're posing for a magazine, one very wholesome, very quiet baker husband, and Osono, who is basically the heart of every small-town British business. The atmosphere is so British coded that you can practically hear someone say, "Fancy a bun, love?" Another thing I noticed while watching this is that the people are polite in that pretending not to notice drama kind of way, which is very, very British. When Kiki crashes her broom, people don't panic. They don't scream. They mostly go, "Oh dear, bit windy today, isn't it?" This is peak British energy. The nicest part is everyone minds their business. They love Kiki, but they're not in her face. They treat her with soft, gentle respect, the same vibe you get from old British neighbourhood stories where a kid starts a job and the whole town quietly roots for him. Kiki herself is the most young British heroine Ghibli ever made. Let's talk about Kiki for a minute. If you put her in a stack of classic British children's book characters like Mary Poppins, Anne from Anne of Green Gables, Wendy Darling, Madeline, the Railway Children, any kid who ever lived in a boarding school in literature, Kiki fits right in. How Kiki mirrors a classic British protagonist. Firstly, she leaves home at 13. Totally normal in anime, totally weird in modern life, but totally normal in older British stories where kids just did things and didn't really get on with their parents. Secondly, she's polite but stubborn. British heroines are always soft-spoken, but emotionally steel-plated. That's Kiki to a T. She works for a living. She's very British. Kids in British literature always have jobs. Deliveries, chores, shops, helping old ladies. Kiki does exactly that. She learns independent the quiet way, not through battles or monsters or magic explosions, but through helping others, balancing work and life, losing confidence and finding it again. It's the same emotional journey as characters in British coming-of-age stories, Swallows and Amazons, The Secret Garden, A Little Princess, except she also flies. So better, obviously. The ending of the film is the moment where British atmosphere and Japanese heart became one. When Kiki gets her powers back, not through fighting, shouting or magical beams, but through believing in herself and helping someone that she cares about. That's when the film's British inspiration and its Japanese storytelling merge perfectly. The rescue scene may look big and dramatic, but emotionally it's still soft. No villain, no evil enemy, no explosion of colours, no grand prophecy. It's just a girl on a broom in a town that she's learning to love. And once she saves Tombo, the town accepts her completely, the same way that a small British village inserts you into their life once you help the old lady reach something from a shelf. Conclusion: Kiki's delivery service is what happens when Japan looks at British and sees magic instead of rain. Kiki's delivery service is basically what if a British seaside town had the warmth of a Japanese heart. That's why it hits so deeply, in my opinion. It blends soft European coziness, a classic British heroine's journey, Japanese emotional storytelling, early 20th century charm, warm glowing colour palettes, and the dream of a simple life filled with tiny victories. It's not British anime, it's anime's fantasy Britain, where nobody yells, every house smells like bread, every window glows warmly, and the cats are sarcastic. Let's be real, this is definitely all my opinion, but I'd be interested to see what you guys have to say. Thank you for watching one of my first ever videos. Please share the video with your friends and family. If you liked it, feel free to subscribe as I'll be uploading here on this channel more frequently. Leave a like on the video to support my work. And please do, comment down below your opinions, disagreements, or anything you'd like to add that you think I missed.